At the beginning of the 21st century, we have reached the point that we risk losing some of the major fisheries in our world's oceans, and in fact we risk losing some species forever.
Our oceans are being overfished. Ecosystems are being destroyed, and livelihoods are endangered worldwide. But in an attempt to reduce overfishing, negotiations are now taking place in the World Trade Organization to reform fishing subsidies. Negotiations which could play a valuable role in recovery of the oceans. North Sea cod stocks have declined by 70% over the past 40 years. In the past 50 years, 90% of large predator fish have been cleared from our oceans. 80% of the world's fish stocks are fully or overexploited. The key factor in this destruction of fish is overfishing caused by too many boats chasing too few fish.
Depleted stocks have huge impacts, not only on the ecosystem, but also on the people who live and work the oceans. And this impacts on their food security, what they eat. It impacts on their ability to send their children to school.
When the industrial fishing fleets trawl the sea beds along our coasts, they're endangering the survival of many small fishing communities. This is an international problem.
In a world with 6.5 billion people and soon 9 billion people, the demand on our ocean resources simply is not sustainable anymore. It is also the short-term gain and short-term profit that people seek, and ultimately it is also the wrong subsidies and government policies that have encouraged fisheries to go well beyond what are sustainable levels of offtake.
And it is not only the developing world whose economy is impacted by the overfishing of the oceans. The World Bank has estimated that the loss of potential profits from the oceans worldwide is over $50 billion every year. As valuable commercial fish stocks collapse, there has been international recognition that ill-conceived government subsidies have contributed to the problem.
Fisheries subsidies are very simply payments from the government to the fishing sector. So these are payments that make fishing more profitable than it would be without them.
In fact, without subsidies, a lot of the most destructive fishing might not be profitable at all.
The key thing about fishing subsidies is that it makes fishing entities or companies that wouldn't be able to fish because of their economics, because the cost, they can't cover their costs, it makes it possible for them to fish.
Government payments to the fishing industry currently amount to between 15 and 35 billion US annually, which is equivalent in value to around 25% of revenue to the marine fishing industry. Subsidies are awarded for a broad variety of purposes, ranging from increasing a country's fishing capacity to supporting the early retirement of fishing fleets. But almost every subsidy is potentially harmful. Subsidies even contribute to widespread illegal fishing, where vessels operate in violation of the laws of a fishery.
It is essential that governments take a new look at fisheries and fisheries subsidies. At national level, there is essential need for action right now. And ultimately, it has to also happen at the international level, because we operate in a global marketplace.
Fisheries subsidies is one area where the connection between sustainability, environmental protection, and trade opening can support each other. A sort of win-win relationship, which is what we are trying to do between UNEP and WTO.
Fisheries subsidies first came onto the international agenda in the 1990s. By 1998, civil society groups were joined by a diverse coalition of governments known as the Friends of Fish, which included New Zealand, Argentina, Chile, the Philippines, Iceland, Australia, and the USA. They campaigned for the WTO to confront the problem. In 2001, a mandate to clarify WTO rules on fisheries subsidies was included on the core agenda of the Doha round of global trade negotiations.
What was achieved in Doha and then in Hong Kong is an agreement, a mandate that WTO members should negotiate strict disciplines on fisheries subsidies.
In 2005, a breakthrough agreement was reached in Hong Kong. By agreeing on the need to ban subsidies that contribute to overcapacity and overfishing, governments had clearly recognized the need to act. This groundbreaking commitment made headlines around the world.
The negotiations on fisheries subsidies were unusual from the start, since unlike in any other trade negotiations, there was an environmental outcome set as an objective from the beginning.
In November 2007, a first draft of rules was drawn up which encouraged the curbing of harmful subsidies. But there are still complex issues on the negotiating table, and it is crucial these are resolved, and soon. The main question in the WTO is which subsidies should be banned, and how to ensure that the ones that remain don't continue to put too much pressure on the oceans. Draft new rules proposed by the chair of the negotiations call for an outright ban on subsidies to vessel construction or modification, as well as subsidies to fuel, bait, or labour costs. There is also a general consensus that subsidies for vessel safety, relief from natural disasters, and vessel decommissioning should continue to be allowed. In accordance with the Hong Kong mandate, the chair also proposed rules for the special and differential treatment of developing countries, allowing them to continue using many fisheries subsidies that would be prohibited for developed countries. But the rules also need to ensure subsidies that are still allowed do not contribute to overcapacity or overfishing.
Well, there should be a broad ban in terms of fisheries subsidies. However, some of them will fall outside, and UNEP and WWF have been working on some sustainability criteria that define when fisheries subsidies could continue. They include that fish stocks are healthy, that capacities are not at full use, and that effective management is in place.
The basic elements of good fisheries management are straightforward. It means count your fish, set science-based limits on catches and bycatch, count your boats, use licenses and fishing rights to limit fishing capacity, enforce the rules. Other key issues are still being debated in the WTO. Until now, governments had been secretive about their subsidies, often granting them without giving the public notice already required by WTO law. New disciplines should make sure notification rules are enforced. Making the new rules work for developing countries is particularly important. Developing countries already pay a disproportionate price for the worldwide depletion of fisheries.
We cannot sit around and do nothing. We know the good fish are not there, but we have to go out and fish every day.
But halting massive subsidies from the major fishing powers is just one part of what is needed. Local fleets in developing countries are still often not technologically advanced. Properly designed subsidies can stimulate modernization and increase financial rewards to poorer communities.
Subsidies should be targeted at helping fishermen to actually improve the value chain of their fishing operation. For example, new fishing nets can reduce bycatch by 60%, improve processing and production plants, better marketing. All these can add value to the actual catch, and this is where subsidies should be targeted. But each fishery must be closely monitored, because even in poorer countries, perverse subsidies can lead to very negative impacts. In Senegal, we collaborated on examining how such subsidies could also lead to depletion of fish stocks.
Balancing economic development with managing resources, governments must ensure that fisheries are managed effectively before they offer up financial assistance to fishing communities. Overall, it is clear the time has come for decisive action to halt the subsidies that are helping cause the global fisheries crisis.
The fishery industry and governments, and indeed consumers also, have increasingly realized that fisheries have now reached an unsustainable level, and the need to act on subsidies is a priority.
Disciplines on fisheries subsidies are extremely important because a large part of our future lies in the oceans, hence the urgency of this negotiation.
The United Nations Environment Programme is calling on governments and also the fisheries industry to look at the future of fisheries from a sustainability perspective. Subsidies should be redirected towards enhancing fish stocks, towards restoring fish stocks. Our partnership with the WTO has, I think, enabled governments first to recognize a problem, but also to identify solutions. And I'm very hopeful that in the negotiations that are now underway, we may in fact see under a trade agreement a major environmental outcome.